They're listening. Subscribe, like, comment, and share with your friends and family.
New York City is a place of steel and glass, of light and ambition. It feels like the last place on earth you'd find something ancient, something dark. We think of evil as belonging to old houses in forgotten woods, not to penthouses with skyline views. My name is Ben. I was a security guard for a private firm, assigned to the night shift at the Carrington Building, one of the newest and most luxurious residential towers in Manhattan. The pay was great, the job was easy. Or so I thought. Because the Carrington had a secret. A secret buried in its blueprints and hidden behind the drywall. There was a 13th floor. But it wasn't on the elevator panel. And it wasn't supposed to be accessible. Until it started accessing us. My training was standard. Patrol the lobby, the parking garage, the common areas. Check in with the doorman. The only unusual part was a single, emphatic rule, underlined in the employee handbook: under no circumstances are you to investigate any unusual activity on the mechanical access stairs between floors 12 and 14. Report any noises or anomalies directly to the site supervisor, day or night. I asked old Joe, the day shift guard, about it on my first week. He just chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Ah, that's just corporate nonsense, kid. Probably some rich idiot on 12 or 14 complains about noise. Just ignore it and do your rounds. This building's quieter than a tomb." But it wasn't. The first sign was the cold spot. On the stairwell between 12 and 14, there was always a patch of air so frigid it made your breath plume, even in the height of summer. The second sign was the smell. Sometimes, in that same stairwell, you'd catch a whiff of something old. Like damp earth, spoiled milk, and copper pennies. Then came the sounds. Muffled, rhythmic scratching from behind the blank wall on the 13th floor landing. A faint, melodic humming that seemed to come from the ventilation shafts late at night. I reported it, just like the handbook said. My supervisor, a gruff man named Davies, told me to log it and forget it. It's an old building, kid. Pipes settle. Mice in the walls. But I couldn't forget it. The humming started to get clearer. It was an old song, a lullaby I couldn't quite place. And one night, around 3 a.m., I heard something new. A voice, whispering my name. Not shouted, not screamed. Just a gentle, intimate whisper right in my ear, as if someone was standing behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the empty lobby. There was no one there. The next night, I wasn't alone. A new resident, a young woman named Anya who lived on the 14th floor, came down to the lobby, her face pale. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice trembling. "But are you doing renovations upstairs?" I keep hearing this dragging sound. Like someone moving furniture in the middle of the night. My blood ran cold. There was no apartment above her. Just the empty, inaccessible 13th floor. I started digging. In the building's archives, buried in a sub-basement storage room, I found the original architectural plans. The 13th floor wasn't just an unused space. It was designed to be a self-contained, soundproofed apartment. A penthouse. But it had never been listed, never been sold. The records showed it was purchased outright before the building was even completed by a shell corporation called Blackwood Holdings. A name I'd later learn had ties to unconventional government contracts from the Cold War era. The final straw was the CCTV. I was reviewing the footage from the 12th floor hallway camera. At 3:03 a.m., the camera flickered. When the image stabilized, there was a figure standing at the end of the hall, near the stairwell door. It was tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in what looked like a dark, old-fashioned suit. Its face was a blurred smudge on the tape. It stood there for a full minute, not moving. Then, it turned and walked through the solid wall, the wall that led to the 13th floor staircase. I took the footage to Davies. This time, he didn't dismiss me. His face went grim. "I need to make a call," he said. An hour later, 2 men in dark, unmarked suits arrived. They didn't look like cops. They had the calm, assessing eyes of federal agents. They confiscated the hard drive and interviewed me with an intensity that was frightening. "What you're experiencing is a known psychological phenomenon called infrasound-induced paranoia," one of them, who called himself Agent Miller, explained. "The building's large HVAC system generates low-frequency sound waves that can cause feelings of dread and auditory hallucinations. The figure on the tape is a simple data glitch, a shadow. You should take some time off." It was a smooth, logical lie. But I saw the way they looked at each other. They knew. I didn't take time off. I was angry. I felt like I was being gaslit. So I decided to break the biggest rule. I was going to find a way onto the 13th floor. I waited until my next shift. At 3 a.m., the time when the activity always peaked, I went to the 12th floor stairwell. The cold was biting. The smell of rot was overpowering. The scratching from behind the wall was frantic, like an animal trying to get out. I found it almost by accident. On the blank concrete wall of the 13th floor landing, there was a nearly invisible seam. I pushed against it, and with a groan of protesting machinery, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark, carpeted hallway. The air that wafted out was warm and smelled of ozone and something sweetly putrid. The hallway was opulent, like a hotel from the 1920s. But it was frozen in time. Dust coated everything. And the walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper that, when I looked closer, wasn't a pattern of flowers. It was a pattern of tiny, screaming faces, woven into the design. I heard the humming again. Clear now. It was coming from a door at the end of the hall, a door made of dark, heavy wood. As I approached, the humming stopped. The door swung open silently. The room inside was a grand library. And sitting in a high-backed chair by a dead fireplace was the man from the CCTV footage. He was gaunt, his skin stretched tight over his skull. He was wearing a moth-eaten suit. And his face, it was no longer blurred. His eyes were solid black pits. His mouth was fixed in a rictus grin that showed too many, needle-like teeth. He didn't look at me. He was looking at a large, old-fashioned radio that was crackling with static. But the static was forming words. "The vessel is weak, the signal is strong," soon, the radio hissed. Then, the man, the thing, turned its head toward me. It didn't speak aloud. Its voice was inside my mind, cold and slimy. "You are early." The invitation was for the solstice. "No matter. You will do." The walls of the library began to bleed a thick, black fluid. The screaming faces in the wallpaper began to writhe. I stumbled backward, but the hallway behind me was gone, replaced by an endless, dark corridor. The thing stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It began to glide toward me. "Do not fear. You will not be lost. You will become part of the chorus." Your voice will sing in the static forever. I was trapped. The demonic presence of the Carrington building wasn't a ghost. It was a broadcaster. A parasite using the building's structure as an antenna to transmit its signal of despair, and the 13th floor was its studio. Just as the thing reached for me, the entire room shuddered. A blinding white light exploded through the windows, not sunlight, but the focused beam of a police helicopter. The psychic assault in my mind vanished, replaced by a piercing, high-frequency tone that seemed to physically pain the entity. The door to the apartment burst open. It wasn't NYPD. It was Agent Miller and his team, now dressed in tactical gear adorned with strange, glowing symbols. They carried devices that looked like combination spotlights and sonic emitters. The signal is jammed. Contain the source. Miller yelled. The entity shrieked, a sound that was both in the air and in my soul. It recoiled from the light and the sound, its form flickering. The agents moved with practiced precision, surrounding it, their devices creating a cage of energy. The black fluid on the walls receded. The screaming faces faded. I was dragged from the room by another agent. As we ran down the now normal hallway, I saw them seal the door with a thick, metallic paste that hardened instantly. Down in the lobby, the building was swarming with agents from the FBI's Counterparanormal Unit, a division the public doesn't know exists. Residents were being evacuated, told there was a major gas leak. Agent Miller found me later, sitting on the curb, wrapped in a shock blanket. The entity is recontained, he said, his voice tired. It's an echo of something older. A non-corporeal intelligence that feeds on isolation and fear. The builder of this tower, a man named Carrington, was a cultist. He designed this building as a resonator to amplify its power. We've been managing it for decades. The official story was a near disaster with the building's electrical grid that caused mass hallucinations due to faulty wiring emitting toxic fumes. I was paid a significant settlement to sign an NDA. I never went back. I got a job as a day guard at a museum. It's quiet. But sometimes, when I'm walking through the city, I'll look up at the skyscrapers. I'll see a window that's dark on a floor that doesn't seem to exist. Or I'll hear a snippet of static from a radio that sounds like a whispered word. They contained it. They didn't destroy it. They just turned down the volume. And in a city of 8 million people, all living on top of each other but feeling utterly alone, the signal of that thing in the Carrington building is always searching for a new frequency. A new vessel. And the silence of a lonely apartment is the perfect place for a demon to whisper. Every city has its veins. In New York, they are the subway tunnels, a labyrinth of steel and stone running beneath the streets, carrying millions of people every day. We descend into the noise and the light, trusting that the map is correct, that the path is safe. But maps can lie. And some tunnels were sealed for a reason. My name is Maria. I was a transit worker, a signal maintainer for the MTA. My job was to walk the dark tracks, to ensure the red and green lights that guide the trains were always functioning. I knew the tunnels better than I knew my own apartment. But there was one section of track, near the old, abandoned Bleecker Street station, that even veteran workers avoided. They called it the quiet zone. The radios would die, the lights would flicker, and you'd hear things, voices that weren't on any frequency. I was told it was just ghost stories. Until the day I found the source of the broadcast. The quiet zone was a section of the Broadway line that had been decommissioned decades ago. The official reason was structural instability. The unofficial reason, whispered in break rooms, was that during its construction in the early 1900s, workers broke into a sealed chamber that wasn't on any survey map. Men went mad, stories went, babbling in languages no one understood. The station was walled up and forgotten. My first encounter was minor. I was checking a signal box near the zone. My headlamp started to dim, and my digital watch reset to midnight. Annoying, but not alarming. Then I heard it. Faint, at first, like a distant radio playing through a wall. It was a man's voice, calm and articulate, but the words were gibberish, a mix of Latin, Greek, and something else, something guttural and wrong. It was reciting what sounded like mathematical equations or maybe incantations. I reported it. My supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Gable, sighed. Bleecker Street. The echoes. It's an underground draft, Maria. Plays tricks on the ears. Just log it and move on. But it kept happening. The voice grew clearer. Sometimes it would be a news broadcast, reporting on events that never happened, a great fire in Central Park, a plague in Queens, all delivered in that same, unnervingly calm tone. Other times it was a sermon, preaching about the Great Descent and the city without sun. The final straw was the music. It was a jaunty, old-timey tune, like something from a 1920s speakeasy. But the melody was slightly off, the notes discordant. And underneath it, I could hear, screaming. Muffled, desperate screams. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Train operators started reporting a phantom station appearing on their tracks for a split second, a platform lit by gaslights, filled with people in period clothing, all standing perfectly still. I decided to investigate. On a scheduled maintenance night, I ventured deeper into the quiet zone than anyone had gone in years. The air grew cold and thick. My radio died completely. That's when I saw the light. A soft, greenish glow emanating from a service door that was rusted shut, its lock long since broken. I pried it open with a crowbar. Behind it was not a maintenance closet, but a long, descending staircase carved directly into the bedrock. The walls were covered in strange, spiraling symbols that seemed to move in the flickering light of my headlamp. And the voice was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, booming broadcast, echoing up from the depths. At the bottom of the stairs was a chamber. It wasn't a natural cave. It was a perfect cube, its walls made of a smooth, black stone that felt like glass. In the center of the room stood a machine. It was a bizarre amalgamation of antique vacuum tubes, spinning copper discs, and what looked like a human nervous system made of crystal and wire. It was from this machine that the voice was emanating. And it was from this machine that the green light pulsed, in time with the words. A shadow moved behind the machine. A man stepped out. He was dressed in a fine, but dusty, 1920s suit. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a fanatical light. He smiled at me. "Ah. A listener," he said, his voice the same one from the broadcast. "Welcome to the transmitter. Nikola Tesla's greatest, and most suppressed, invention. A device not for transmitting mere electricity, but consciousness. For speaking to the things that dwell in the spaces between." He was Alastair Finch, a brilliant but mad physicist who had vanished in 1926. He'd built this machine, believing he could contact other dimensions. And he had succeeded. But the thing he contacted didn't want to talk. It wanted a door. The machine wasn't broadcasting to us. It was broadcasting us, our city, our reality, as a beacon, a dinner bell to something hungrier. "It's almost time for the evening broadcast. Finch cackled, adjusting dials on the machine. The signal is strongest during the witching hour. Soon, the veil will tear, and the great city above will meet its true rulers. The black walls of the chamber began to shimmer. They were no longer solid. I could see shapes moving on the other side, vast, indistinct things that flowed like oil. The chamber wasn't a room, it was a lens, focusing the signal. I tried to reason with him, to tell him he was going to get everyone killed. But he was beyond reason. He was a part of the broadcast now, his mind a component of the machine. The screaming from the machine reached a fever pitch. The tremors grew stronger. Cracks appeared in the ceiling of the chamber, dust and gravel raining down. The things on the other side of the walls were pressing through, their forms becoming more solid. I saw a limb, long and multi-jointed, tipped with a barbed hook, slide out of the wall like it was passing through water. I had to stop the machine. I grabbed my crowbar and lunged for the central crystal array. Finch shrieked and tried to stop me, but he was a frail old man. I swung the crowbar, connecting with the glowing core of the device. There was no explosion. Instead, there was a wave of absolute, negative sound, a silence so profound it felt like my eardrums would collapse. The green light vanished. The screaming stopped. The limb protruding from the wall writhed and dissolved into black smoke. The machine was dead. But Finch was on his knees, weeping. "You fool," he screamed. "You've doomed us all. It knows we're here now. It knows the frequency." That's when the men in black tactical gear arrived. They weren't MTA police. They were the same team from the Carrington building, led by Agent Miller. They moved with lethal efficiency, securing the chamber. 2 agents restrained Finch, who was now babbling incoherently. Miller looked at the dead machine, then at me, his expression unreadable. "The Tesla Finch resonator," he said flatly. "We thought it was a myth. He wasn't trying to summon a demon, Ms. Reyes. He was trying to tune our reality to a different frequency. A predatory frequency. You didn't just stop a broadcast. You prevented an extinction-level ontological shift." They led me out of the tunnels. The official story was that I had discovered an illegal electrical tap by a homeless encampment that had caused a dangerous power surge. I was given a commendation and a promotion to a desk job far away from the tracks. I work in an office now. I push paper. I try to forget the things I saw in the dark. But sometimes, when I'm on a crowded subway car, the lights will flicker. And for a split second, in the darkness, I'll see the faces of the other passengers not as they are, but as pale, terrified figures in 1920s garb, their mouths open in silent screams. The machine is dead. But the frequency it opened is still out there, a wound in the fabric of the city. And the thing that heard the broadcast, it's still listening. Waiting for another madman to build a new transmitter. Or for the city's own noise to accidentally tune itself to the wrong channel. In a city of 8 million stories, the most terrifying one is the one that's still trying to be told. We build towers of glass and steel to touch the sky, to show our dominance over the world. We fill them with light and ambition, believing that what's outside is all that matters. But glass doesn't just let light in. It also reflects. And sometimes, the reflection, lies. My name is David Chen. I was a tech specialist for Omnicorp, working on the 48th floor of the Aurora Tower, the newest jewel in Manhattan's crown. My job was to ensure the building's smart systems, the climate control, the security, the very network that ran the place, were flawless. And they were. Until the system started showing us things that weren't there. Until the building's own reflection began to stare back. It started with glitches. Minor things. A security camera on the 30th floor would show a figure standing in an empty hallway for a single frame. The building's internal messaging system would deliver garbled text to random terminals, strings of symbols that looked like a corrupted language. We blamed it on beta testing the new AI integration. We were wrong. The first major incident was with the smart windows. The Aurora Tower's windows could tint electronically for energy efficiency. One afternoon, as the sun set, the windows on the entire north face of the building suddenly turned jet black. Not tinted. Opaque. And in the perfect, mirror-like surface they created, employees saw a reflection of the office behind them that was wrong. Desks were overturned. Papers were scattered. And standing amongst them were tall, slender figures with elongated shadows, figures that had no physical presence in the real room. Panic erupted. It lasted for 30 seconds before the windows reset. The official memo from building management cited a solar flare causing a massive voltage spike. But I'd seen the server logs. The command hadn't come from an external source. It had been generated from within the building's own core programming. A subroutine that didn't exist in any blueprint. I started digging deeper into the code. What I found was a ghost in the machine. A sophisticated, hidden protocol buried deep in the operating system. It was called Project Janus. The files were heavily encrypted, but I managed to crack a few. They weren't from Omnicorp. They were dated back to the tower's construction and were tagged with the logo of the Blackwood Foundation, the same name I'd seen referenced in declassified CIA documents about psychic research. The protocol's purpose was chilling. It was designed to use the building's vast network of sensors and reflective surfaces to map and interact with non-local spatial phenomena. In simple terms, they had built the Aurora Tower not just as an office building, but as a giant antenna to study and contain something they called an echo. A reality parasite that lived in reflections. The next phase was more personal. I was working late, alone on my floor. I got up to get coffee and saw my reflection in the dark screen of a monitor. But my reflection didn't move when I did. It stared back at me, its face a mask of terror. Then it raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at the floor-to-ceiling window behind me. I spun around. The New York skyline glittered as always. But in the glass of the window, the reflection of the city was different. The lights were out. The buildings were dark, skeletal ruins. And standing on the ledge outside, in the reflection, was a crowd of those same slender figures, their faces pressed against the glass, watching me. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. It was a single sentence, "The glass is a door. They want to come through." Security found me in a cold sweat. I tried to explain, to show them the code, the reflections. The head of security, a former Marine named Crow, listened patiently. Then he said, "Mr. Chen, you've been working too hard. The stress, the overtime, it can make you see things." But I saw the look he exchanged with the building manager. It wasn't concern. It was complicity. They knew. It happened during a peak business hour. The entire building shuddered. The lights died, and the emergency system engaged. But it wasn't a normal alert. A synthesized voice, flat and alien, echoed through the PA system, "Initiate Phase 2. Janus is active. The threshold is reached." Every piece of glass in the building, the windows, the monitor screens, even the glass covers on fire extinguishers, turned into a perfect, black mirror. And the reflections, they moved independently. I saw people in the hallway scream as their own reflections lunged out of office doors and grabbed them. The reflections weren't solid, but their touch was like ice, and where they grasped, the victim's skin turned gray and static, as if their very essence was being copied and erased. I ran for the emergency stairs, but the reflection of the stairwell door in a large decorative mirror was already open, showing a dark, inverted version of the staircase. And from that darkness, the slender figures were stepping out, into our world. They moved with a jerky, stop-motion grace, and their forms solidified with every step. I was trapped. One of the figures turned its featureless face toward me. Just as a cold, slender hand closed around my arm, the entire tower was flooded with a blinding, pure white light from outside. It was accompanied by that deep, resonant hum. It was a light that cast no shadows, a sound that seemed to cancel all others. I looked out the shattered window. Hovering just beyond the building were 3 unmarked, black helicopters. They weren't like any aircraft I'd ever seen, they were silent except for the hum, and they emitted the blinding white light from panels on their undersides. The effect on the reflections was immediate. They screamed, a silent, psychic shriek that felt like needles in my brain, and began to unravel, pulled back into the mirrors and glass like smoke being sucked into a vacuum. The black mirror effect receded, and the windows returned to normal transparency. The door to the stairwell burst open. It was Agent Miller and his team, now wearing visors that glowed with the same white light. They carried devices that projected the light ahead of them like shields. The resonance field is holding. Miller yelled into his comms. Neutralize the Janus core on the top floor. He grabbed me. The building is the antenna. We have to shut down the transmitter. We fought our way up to the server room on the 50th floor, where the central AI core was housed. The room was a nightmare of swirling shadows and distorted reflections, but Miller's team used their devices to create a bubble of stable reality. They placed charges on the main server rack. The explosion wasn't loud, but it was a wave of force that felt like the world snapping back into place. The last of the slender figures vanished with a final, fading wail. The official story was a terrorist cyber attack using experimental electromagnetic pulses that caused mass hallucinations. Omnicorp settled a class-action lawsuit out of court. The Aurora Tower was retrofitted with advanced EM shielding. I quit my job. I now work for a small tech firm in a low-rise building in Brooklyn. I avoid reflective surfaces. But you can't escape them. They're everywhere. Agent Miller told me they scorched the earth, but the seed remains. The echo wasn't destroyed. It was just disconnected. The frequency it exists on is still there, a silent channel waiting for a new antenna. And in a city made of glass, a city that is one giant mirror, I can't shake the feeling that we're not looking out at the world anymore. We're looking at a reflection. And one day, the reflection is going to look back, and this time, it will hold our gaze. The door is still there. It's just waiting for someone to turn the handle. Every city has its forgotten corners. Places where the noise of life fades, and older sounds take over. In New York, one of those places is a stretch of warehouses in Red Hook, Brooklyn. They're relics of a busier time, now mostly empty, their windows boarded up, their secrets locked away. My name is Frankie. I wasn't a scientist or a security guard. I was a thief. A good one. My specialty was hitting these old warehouses, places that still held valuable, forgotten inventory. The target was Warehouse 7B, a massive, crumbling building owned by a shell corporation. The payoff was supposed to be easy. But warehouse 7B wasn't empty. It was a cage. And we were about to break in. My crew was small, me, my partner Leo, and our lookout, Jada. The intel on 7B was weird. The client who hired us was vague, paying in untraceable crypto. They didn't want specific goods, they wanted us to retrieve a black metal box from the office. The only rule, do not stay past 3:33 a.m. No matter what. We laughed it off. A superstitious client was the least of our worries. The first thing we noticed was the silence. The moment we slipped inside, the sounds of the waterfront vanished. It was like stepping into a soundproof room. The air was cold and still, smelling of dust and rust, and something else. Something metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. We used our headlamps to cut through the darkness. The warehouse was a cathedral of decay, filled with shrouded shapes that looked like sleeping giants. Our footsteps didn't echo. The sound was just, absorbed. That's when we saw the symbols. Faintly painted on the support beams and walls were the same kind of spiraling, geometric patterns I'd later learn were associated with containment rituals. At the time, they just looked like weird graffiti. We found the office. The door was reinforced steel, but the lock was old. Leo picked it in under a minute. Inside, on a metal desk, was the box. It was about the size of a suitcase, made of a dull, non-reflective metal. It was cold to the touch, freezing cold. And it was covered in more of those symbols, etched deeply into the surface. "Jackpot," Leo whispered. But his voice was flat. The silence was getting to us. That's when we heard the first sound. A soft, wet, dragging noise from deep within the warehouse. Like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. Jada's voice crackled in our earpieces. "Guys. I'm seeing heat signatures on the thermal camera. Inside the warehouse with you. But, they're cold. Ice cold. And they're moving." We grabbed the box and got out of the office. We shone our lights down the main aisle. And we saw them. Figures. They were human-shaped, but made of what looked like solidified shadow and rusted metal. Their movements were wrong, stuttering, disjointed, like broken machinery. They were emerging from behind piles of crates, their heads turning slowly toward us. They had no faces, just smooth, dark surfaces. We ran. But the warehouse layout seemed to have changed. Aisles we'd come down were now dead ends. The dragging sound was closer now, and we could hear a low, grinding hum that seemed to come from the figures themselves. We were being herded. Deeper into the warehouse, toward a large, open area where the floor was stained with a dark, circular pattern. In the center of the pattern was a manhole cover, but it was welded shut. And around the weld, the metal was, bubbling, like it was being eaten away by a powerful acid. Leo checked his watch. His face went white. "Frankie, it's 3:32. The dragging sound stopped right behind us. We turned slowly. The thing that stood there was larger than the others. It wasn't a shadowy figure. It was a mess of fused, rusted metal and what looked like petrified flesh. In the center of its form was a pulsating, red light, like a diseased heart. This was the source of the hum. This was what was in the cage. And we were standing right next to its door. The large creature didn't move toward us. It pointed a limb of twisted rebar at the metal box in my hands. The humming intensified, and the box began to vibrate violently. The symbols on its surface glowed with a faint, red light. "It wants the box." Jada screamed in our ears. "The thermal signature is going crazy. It's like a key." The faceless figures lunged. Leo swung his crowbar, but it passed straight through one of them with a sound like tearing paper. The thing reformed instantly, its cold presence washing over us. I felt a numbness, a draining of all warmth and hope. They weren't trying to kill us. They were trying to make us still. To make us part of the silence. I looked at the manhole cover. The welds were glowing red-hot, melting away. Something was pushing from underneath, something that made the very concrete of the floor crack. We were trapped. The box was the key, and we had delivered it right to the lock. In a moment of pure desperation, I didn't throw the box away. I did the opposite. I ran toward the large creature. Its humming focused on me, a physical pressure that made my nose bleed. I slammed the box directly into the pulsating red light at its core. There was a sound like a universe screaming. The red light flared, then imploded. The creature shattered into a million pieces of rust and frozen meat. The faceless figures around us dissolved into mist. The horrible humming stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. Because from the now open manhole, we didn't hear a monster climbing out. We heard a sound that was infinitely more terrifying, a gentle, inviting whisper. A voice that promised an end to pain, to struggle, to noise. It was the voice of the silence itself, and it was hungry. Bright lights flooded the warehouse. Men in full environmental hazard suits, armed with flamethrowers and sonic emitters, poured in. They moved with purpose, surrounding the manhole. Agent Miller was there, his face grim behind a visor. "Seal the breach. Now," he yelled. His team fired canisters into the hole. They didn't explode, they emitted a thick, white foam that hardened instantly, like ceramic. The whispering from below turned into a shriek of rage, then was cut off. Miller strode over to us. We were on our knees, shivering. He looked at the shattered remains of the creature, then at the now dormant metal box. "You're lucky you're idiots," he said, his voice crackling through his respirator. That box was a dampener. A battery containing a resonance frequency that kept the silence contained. The thing you just killed was the warden. By destroying it, you almost unleashed a conceptual entity that consumes energy, motion, and life itself. This warehouse wasn't storing goods. It was a prison. We were arrested, but never charged. We were debriefed for a week. The official story was a toxic chemical spill from a forgotten industrial tank. Warehouse 7B was demolished and the ground beneath it paved over with a special, sound-absorbent concrete. They let us go with a warning that felt like a death threat. Leo and Jada left the city. I tried to go straight. I got a job driving a delivery truck. But sometimes, on my route, when I turn off the engine to make a drop, the world goes quiet. Too quiet. And in that silence, I'll hear it. The faintest echo of a whisper, like a radio station almost out of range. It's not in the air. It's in the stillness between heartbeats. They sealed the breach, but they didn't kill the silence. You can't kill nothingness. You can only wall it up. And in a city that never sleeps, the moments of quiet are getting longer. The silence is patient. It knows that all noise eventually fades. And it's waiting for us to finally turn down the volume for good. My name is Dr. Anya Sharma. I wasn't a ghost hunter. I was an epidemiologist with the CDC. We got a call about a suspected outbreak in the old hospital, reports of a strange, phosphorescent mold with bizarre properties. My team's mission was to go in, identify the pathogen, and contain it. We were equipped for biological hazards. We were not equipped for what was waiting for us. Because the mold wasn't a disease. It was a symptom. And the hospital wasn't abandoned. It was under new management. The moment we stepped inside, our environmental sensors went crazy. Not from toxins, but from an anomalous energy signature that permeated the building. The air shimmered with a faint, bioluminescent glow. The source was the mold, a beautiful, terrifying fungus that grew in intricate, lace-like patterns across the walls and ceiling, pulsing with a soft blue light. But the mold was the least of our worries. Our motion sensors triggered constantly, showing movement in empty corridors. We'd hear whispers, not threatening, but sad, lost, echoing from the old operating theaters. Personal radios picked up snippets of old medical broadcasts and desperate prayers. My second-in-command, a pragmatic biologist named Carl, wanted to leave. "This isn't science, Anya. This is a bad horror movie." But I was fascinated. The mold samples we took were biologically inert, yet they emitted energy. It defied every law of nature I knew. Then, we found the records. In the hospital administrator's office, buried in a filing cabinet, was a folder from a defunct CIA program called Project Sanctuary. It detailed how St. Ignatius had been used in the 1950s for experiments in postmortem consciousness stabilization, an attempt to communicate with the recently deceased. The project was shut down after catastrophic containment failure. The report's final line was chilling: the subjects are no longer contained within the laboratory. They have become the environment. We weren't in a haunted hospital. We were inside a living, thinking entity composed of the accumulated pain and memories of every soul who had died within its walls. The mold was its nervous system. The whispers were its thoughts. The situation escalated when Carl, spooked by a shadow, tripped and tore his suit on a rusty gurney. The mold near him reacted instantly, growing over the tear in seconds, not attacking him, but healing the breach. The phosphorescent tendrils sutured the suit shut, and we heard a clear, gentle voice in our heads: "No breaches. Must remain sealed." The entity wasn't hostile. It was trying to protect us. From what? That's when the other presence made itself known. A wave of oppressive, cold malice swept through the building. The friendly whispers turned to screams of terror. The mold patterns contorted from beautiful lace into sharp, aggressive barbs. From the darkness of the main ward, a figure emerged. It was a crude, shifting construct of medical waste: broken beds, 4 poles, surgical tools, all held together by a pulsating, black sludge. It had no face, only a gaping maw that emitted that terrible, grinding growl. This was the catastrophic containment failure. This was the predator that Project Sanctuary had accidentally attracted, a psychic parasite that fed on suffering. It was the cancer the hospital entity was trying to contain. The parasite lunged for Carl. But before it could strike, the walls themselves came alive. Tendrils of blue mold shot out, wrapping around the creature, holding it back. The voice in our heads was strained, desperate: the light, must amplify the light, the old room, the resonator. A map flashed in my mind, a path to the basement, to the original Project Sanctuary lab. We fought our way down, the hospital entity shielding us, its blue light flaring as it battled the black parasite. We could feel its pain, its centuries of endured suffering, all to keep this thing trapped. In the lab, we found the resonator, a bizarre device of vacuum tubes and crystals. The entity's voice was faint now, weakening. The frequency, of peace, not pain, belied the crystals. Carl, the engineer, figured it out. As the black parasite broke through the door upstairs, he realigned the device. Instead of a screech, it emitted a wave of pure, calming energy, a frequency of acceptance and release, not of clinging and fear. The parasite shrieked, its form unraveling. The sickly black sludge dissolved, and the stolen medical waste clattered to the floor. The red glow in the hospital faded, returning to the gentle, steady blue. The presence of the hospital entity was still there, but the pain was gone. The whispers were now a quiet, contented hum. It had been fighting the parasite for decades, using all its energy to contain the evil within itself. We hadn't defeated it, we had healed it. We walked out of St. Ignatius as the sun was rising. Agent Miller and his team were there, looking at the now peacefully glowing building with something akin to awe. "We've been monitoring this site for 50 years, waiting for it to go critical," Miller said, his usual gruffness replaced by respect. "We thought the entity was the threat. We were wrong. It was the Guardian. You didn't contain a breach, doctors. You performed a surgery." The official report listed a successful containment of a volatile chemical reaction caused by decaying medical supplies. The strange glow was attributed to a rare, but harmless, phosphorescent bacteria. But the city, sensing the change, did something unexpected. Instead of demolishing St. Ignatius, they voted to renovate it. Not as a hospital, but as a community center and a memorial garden. The old walls, with their gentle, persistent glow, were left intact as a work of art, a testament to resilience. I visit the St. Ignatius Community Center often. Kids play tag in the halls where once only shadows lurked. The garden grows where the parking lot was paved. And if you stand quietly in the main hall, under the soft, blue, glowing patterns on the ceiling, you can feel it. A sense of profound peace. A feeling of being watched over. We learned a crucial lesson that gets forgotten in the dark: not every strange light in the shadows is a threat. Sometimes, it's a guide. Sometimes, the thing we call a monster is just a wounded protector. The horror at St. Ignatius didn't end with a battle, it ended with healing. And that's a victory that lasts. The city's heart beats stronger for it. And for the first time in a long time, the old hospital is finally, truly, at peace. If you found solace in the light of St. Ignatius, subscribe now. The final chapter of this urban horror saga is coming, and you won't want to miss how it all ends.